So guys, this I'm going to just give you a little bit of introduction to this because I know most of you are new to this program that we run. It's an initiative that we started back at the beginning of COVID, not knowing what the world was going to be doing and where things were heading to. We took the view that no matter what the challenges the world faced, people would deal with them a lot better if they could at least be in stride and true to themselves. And so we offered up, just as a voluntary thing, these webinars every couple of weeks to help people better understand their ID and how to use it to stay in stride as they navigated all of the turbulence that COVID was bringing, and the uncertainty and so on, the fear that was there. But it actually built a real community of people that found that in this forum they could talk very openly, very honestly about their strengths and how they're using them, about their vulnerabilities and how to mitigate them. And even though COVID has largely subsided, and a lot of the fears associated with it, they've asked to keep these forums going. And as we built momentum, just recently we began offering them to on a time-friendly arrangement for the EMEA and, if you like, the eastern side of the world, which is partly Australia and New Zealand, and of course all the way up through Asia and Europe. So welcome to you all, and I'm sure over time this community will also build similarly to the one that we ran early today for if you like, the western side of the world. So what we do is we have a topic that we choose every month. As you can see, for this month, this is the first webinar. We call it Living in Stride. It's more of a introductory webinar about the topic, and it's where we talk to the ID applications and the nuances around different ID insights on the topic. So this is about, what is it about your ID that really can make you most impactful and credible as a leader? And what are the things about your ID that can erode your impact and erode your credibility? And then in 2 weeks' time, we have what we call the ID Masterclass. And this is a forum very similar to today, this webinar forum, for people that want to dig deeper into the nuances. Typically, it's for people that are like our coaches and consultants, or ID passionate champions that want to really better understand themselves, the ID framework, and through that understanding, be able to take it more, out to their various communities and ecosystems. So you have 2 opportunities every month. Next month, we'll pick a different topic, and we try and keep it so that it's modern and current and of interest to the general population that come to these webinars. And through it serves our vision. Our vision is for everyone in the world to know and also use their ID, not just do it and stick it in a drawer, but do it, get impacted by it, and keep it alive in their mind so that they can live their lives very much true to their authentic nature, your ID. Now, in terms of the process of these webinars, it's not a sales forum. There's no pitch you're going to hear from me. There's no obligation on you to buy anything, do anything. This is purely our way of giving back and trying to make a contribution. We will advertise various things that could be coming up, like today. One of the things we're going to talk about, and you can see it here, is our next certification program. It's just to let you know, for those of you who might be interested in digging deeper into a deep dive 3-day learning on ID. We have that coming up at the end of November. It is a US friendly time zone program. This particular one, we do vary them every quarter, but this one that's coming up on the 25th and 26th of October, it's a 3-day program. So we run 2 days back to back. They're about 6 hours of tuition, all done online, but they're live programs. So we have 2 facilitators run a live program. We have some breaks scattered throughout. They're very engaging. They're absolutely world-class facilitators. The topic, of course, is really interesting. The people that come onto them are, like-minded people that are really awesome human beings that care about being authentic, care about living their life in stride, and how they can help other people do that as well. So there's normally a diversity of IDs. So we do 2 days of intense learning. Then there's a week's break, typically about a week, so you can go away and apply it. There's various homework exercises that are given. And then you come back for day 3 into the forum again to share what you've learned and learn a little more, and walk out at the end of the 3 days with a very, solid and richer understanding of your ID, more competency and confidence to go away and use it. So I would highly recommend that program. If you are interested, just shoot a note to Ian Robertson, who you can see on screen here. Ian will send you the details that you need to either learn more register or share it with others that you might think could be benefiting from a program like that. All right. Other than for that, a couple of things about the format of today. We do record the session. So it's just so that those who can't make it, and not everyone can make these time zones, they can then come along, they can listen at a later point and participate almost as if they were here. Obviously, they can't interact live, but they can hear all of the interactions that we have. Secondly, the thing I would recommend is if in future you can't make this time and participate live, but you'd like to get the information on the topic, register for the webinar, because that will then allow us to send you the recording. So we'll send you the recording afterwards, and then in your own time, you can go through and listen to the replay. The slides that I showed during the webinars, we send out with the recording. So any of the slides, you don't need to worry about doing screenshots. You will receive them with the recording link a little later after the webinar today. So I think that's it. The other thing is over on the, you can see with the Zoom format, you can participate in the chat. So we've often got sort of two webinars happening. We've got me here talking to you live on the topic. And often if you've got questions or comments, put them in the chat or raise them with me. I'll stop and take questions and comments from time to time. And I'll open it up to more of a Q&A as we get further into the session today. But if you've got comments that you want to make or questions that you have, and you either feel more comfortable putting them in the chat, feel free to participate in the chat party that will happen over there. And I'm sure Ian will keep his eye on that and respond to some of the things you say in writing. I'll see some of them and I'll respond verbally at times to some of them as well. But please feel free to put your questions over there. It's not distracting at all. The other thing I would encourage you to do, both in our webinar here, but also when you do this in future with your teams or however you might be using ID where you are, is you can see that with Ian, Tristan and myself, we've all got our IDs in our name. So if you right click on your name, you can put your ID in there. And what that does, and you'll see this play out as we get into the webinar, when people make their comments or have questions, when we know your ID, we know how to hear the question. And I'll try and explain some of those nuances to you as we go through today. The other thing I would ask you or encourage you to do, I'm not saying it's a requirement, but if it's possible for you to have your video on, particularly when you're interacting with us live, it makes it more engaging and more fun and more valuable for everyone that's participating. So please, think about doing that if you can. We would very much appreciate that, particularly as you start to ask your questions. On that point, before I get into the rest of the session today, does anyone have any questions or comments before we start? You might just need to take yourself off mute. You can also raise your hand. I'll see that typically. I'm always got the screen in one eye. So feel free to either raise your hand, take yourself off mute, interrupt me at any time. All right, without further ado, let's get into today's session. So the topic, all about your leadership and how you best impact and build credibility, the things that strengthen it, the things that erode it. That's what we're going to focus on today. Now, what I would say to you is there are things that are peculiar to your ID. But before we look at the ID nuances, the thing I can say to you is that there are some generic things that are true for everybody. So the first thing you want to do is think about being in stride. I know this might sound really basic, but it's one of those things that's easy to say, harder to do, because there are always forces in life pulling you out of stride. And we show that by this slide here. This slide we call our peak performance indicator. And you can see over here on the left is someone's ID. And we put that ID into the middle of this green arrow here to say, when this person is living life and traveling along the highway of life, that green arrow, in stride with their ID, in stride with their true, authentic self, that's when they live their best life. When we talk about showing up and being the best version of yourself, that occurs. There is an absolute 100% correlation between being true to your ID and living your best life. The things here at the top, peak performance, a sense of fulfillment, a sense of achievement, your self-esteem, your self-worth, your self-confidence, and physically, your energy and your health are at their best when you are being true to yourself. That's why people have said for centuries, be true to yourself, get in flow. Athletes talk about being in the zone. Long before my time, people could see the value of living like this. I saw an interview last year with Oprah Winfrey talking about the power of being true to your authentic self. what people have been wondering is, but what is that? How do I discover that? And how much of my true self is already like hardwired into me, and how much of it is the product of the environment I grew up in? So here's what I can tell you after 32 years of research, very active research. When you think about nature and nurture, the ID is very much the nature part of you. Now, there is still the nurture side. It's not nature or nurture, it's nature and nurture, but the ID speaks to the nature side of you. So this is the hardwired part of you. It's not based on your parents. It's not based on life conditioning. But what does happen, and the arrows to the left and the right here on the chart show this, is that there are forces in life that pull you out of stride, either to the left or to the right, because the minute you were born, they saw that you were a girl or they saw that you were a boy. They had life had expectations for you. Your parents typically could have had expectations. They dressed you in certain clothes based on your gender, and then based on what you started to do and how you might have expressed yourself, we have all sorts of expectations, including stereotypical expectations for how we educate people, for how we operate in a family, when you go into your career based on how you studied, or how well you did in school. There are things that people point you to in terms of your career. Even when you get into a relationship, there are expectations based on being the man of the house or the woman of the house. There are things that people expect. And of course, now the whole family dynamic is shifting even more than where it was, 10, 20, 30 years ago for sure. So expectations are there in life. We can't just, defy them, but we can acknowledge that they exist. And then we can sort of decipher which of those expectations work for me and which ones don't. So I'll give you a simple example. When you're going through school, the school system is very much geared to verify completes, get organized. They don't, people, what's that adage? People don't plan to fail, they fail to plan. Teachers give you your lessons at the start of the term so that you don't have to rush at the end. You can spread it out through the term and be more organized and not hurry, because when people who rush make mistakes, and then they'll sub-optimize their results. Now, that's true for some people, but there are people in life, and some of you are on this call, some of you have got that drive to improvise. And when you are at the last minute and you've got the adrenaline pumping, your back's against the wall, that's when you pull rabbits out of the hats. And that's why when you might have been pulling all-nighters at university or even in high school, getting exams, getting assignments completed and so on, you can feel bad, you can feel guilty that you're doing it that way. And yet, ironically, you picked a really good result. Because if that was your ID, you are actually more in stride working under that adrenaline pressure than if you'd have mapped everything out and done it in a more organized way. But of course, that would then get the wrath of teachers or of parents sometimes because it wasn't the proper way. So what we need to do in life is understand, firstly, what our ID is. What is that green arrow for each of us? What are the forces around you that might be coming for very loving, supportive reasons, but they don't actually work for you, like that education example? Recalibrate them. And then when you do start to get pulled out of stride, what are your early warning signals that, start to pull you out? And what do you do to then get back in stride? That's the power of ID. It's not that you live this life of bliss and nothing, impedes your journey. It's knowing how to recalibrate those different expectations and situations that might normally rattle other people's cages. But for you, you know how to reframe it so that you can stay in stride. Now, it's not just about your performance and your health. You can see here this horizontal axis is saying when you get pulled out of stride, you miss out on tracking straight to all of the benefits of life, and you start to experience forms of stress. Initially, it's behavioral and things like, attitude, temper, swearing, lethargy, procrastination. They're the things that occur when you're a little bit off track. But as you get pulled increasingly out of stride with your ID, it takes its toll on your health. And we've done research on all sorts of medical conditions that either occur or are exacerbated because people get pulled out of stride. So, for example, we put them into 5 categories. These aren't the only 5, but some of you will relate to what I'm about to share with you. It's energy, immunity, skin, respiratory, and digestive. So if just take skin as an example, eczema, acne, psoriasis, cold sores, mouth ulcers, they're all examples of indicators of people being out of stride. And if you go back and look at for those of you who have various skin issues, when you are under stress and feeling out of stride, and if you were to map your life and sort of go, let me look at the roles where I was pulled right off track, let me look at the relationships where I was way out of stride, I guarantee you'll see a correlation between those conditions worsening. And it may not have been skin for you, it might have been respiratory, or it might have been, chronic fatigue or an autoimmune issue. So just know that there is that correlation. So not only do you take care of your health if you get back in track with your ID, but this yellow box also plays out. And that's where we're going to focus today, because in addition to your performance and your stress being affected, it has a lot to do with how you show up. When you are in stride, you feel much more confident, you feel more courageous. And because you've got that inner energy and vitality about you, you're more inclined to speak your truth and encourage other people to do the same. But when you're out of stride, you want to hide. It's like when people are feeling sick, like, I don't want to socialize, I don't want to be seen, I look terrible. Well, there's looking terrible physically, but there's also looking terrible or feeling terrible mentally. And when people are out of stride and stressed, they don't feel confident to speak up. They're worried about what other people are going to think, how they might react. And so we tend to shrink and hide. So think about that when you're in a leadership position. And I don't just mean at a work leadership position. I mean, when you are trying to lead your family, when you're just trying to influence your ecosystem, whether it's your friendship network, your sport, or your health circle, it might be a gym community, or whoever it is that you're interacting with day in, day out, how you are seen by them has a lot to do with whether you're in stride or not. And then more to the point, how you are impacting them, which we're going to talk about today, will have a lot to do with whether you're in stride. So I have a simple question for you. On a scale of 0 to 10, if 10 is in stride, you're like on that green arrow and you are shining, thriving is the word. You are experiencing, some people say, I just feel joyful. Like, my life is real joy right now. That's like a 10. If you are a 1 or a 2, that's like, oh my God, I'm pulled so far out to the right or so far out to the left, I can hardly get out of bed. I just look at the day and think, oh, I don't want to face this. You're really out of stride. What's the number that comes up for you? You will have a number or an expression as to where you would calibrate yourself. If you wish, you're welcome to put it in the chat. I'll tell you, for example, that today I'd say I'm somewhere around an 8 or a 9. Probably right now I feel more like a 9 because I love doing this sort of thing and, feeling like I can make a difference to people through the power of ID. But some of us can start the day as an 8 or 9. Yeah, thank you. And some of us can go into our first meeting and within minutes, we feel like we're being sucked down this pipe that takes us to a 3 or 4 or a 5 or a 6. Or we could start the day flat and then we have a phone conversation with someone that sparks us up and away we go, we're up at an 8 or a 9. But the challenge is this. Some people's numbers are affected by their environment. The less self-aware, the more that number is you're going to be reactive with it. The more self-aware you are, the more you can quickly regroup and make sure that your number might sort of go from like a 9 to an 8, maybe even to a 7 sometimes, but you can quickly get it back up. And so you sit up in that top zone of the 8s and 9s, and you use like the floor would be like a 7. So the question is, what number do you want to be? If you want to be credible and of high impact, what's the number that works? And what I can tell you, I'm not asking you to share your number, but I will tell you this. When we do the ID Masterclass in 2 weeks' time, that is a protocol that we all use in that class. And so that group where there are people that care about being really in stride and they're there to dig in and be more vulnerable and be authentic, we do share our number and we talk about our number. Not everyone has to. And by the way, there's no compulsion to share your number, but people typically very enthusiastically share the number. And I've actually had, I think Ian will remember this, we've had a couple of occasions where I forgot to do the pulse with everyone. And someone said, oh, are you going to do the check-in? Because I want to share my number and I want to talk and I want to get the help from the team on my number, If the number was down, they want help to pull it up. If the number was high, they want to share and celebrate what they've done to get there in case that can also help other people. This particular exercise of talking about your peak performance indicator score, we call it your PPI score and a PPI check-in. This protocol is a high performance teaming protocol. And I would highly recommend it to any of you that are in teams, and especially if you're leading a team. Most of our best leaders who have come to learn about ID, this is a little practice they do on about a monthly basis in their teams. Yeah, it doesn't take that long, but they'll whip around and they'll just say to everyone, let's do a PPR check-in or a team pulse check-in. And they just ask everyone to share their score and then have a relatively brief discussion on anyone that might want to share what's going on, so that they just are level setting with the team and they can help the team understand where they're at and maybe why they're reacting the way they are. It's a powerful exercise to do as a team. So the question I asked was, what number do you want to strive to be? Is a 10 possible? So here are the answers. A 10 is absolutely possible. We have a lot of clients that experience being a 10. It's a little bit like saying, is it possible to be in love? Yes, a lot of people have experienced being in love. Is it possible to be in love every day? Yes, it's possible to be in love every day, and a number of people have experienced that. But I suppose most people tend to vacillate in and out. They might have some days where they're in love, and some days it's not quite the way they might be feeling. And the same is true of in stride. It doesn't mean they don't love the person. It doesn't mean they wouldn't do everything they could for that person, but maybe they're not at their very best. A few things often need to line up for you to be at that best situation. And it's a little bit like an athlete. You know, you can do everything you can in all your training and performance. Sometimes you need just a little sprinkling of luck. And 10 is a little bit like that. Sometimes you need everything to line up. But there are many people who have learned about ID that live their lives as 8 and 9s every single day. And it is possible. So I would really give you that as a gift. If that's something that doesn't seem possible for you right now, and that's even challenging your thinking, please know that you don't need to stay there. It is possible to live your life with more freedom, with more energy, with more vitality. And it would be honestly a pleasure of mine and my team to help you figure that out. If that's something you'd like to talk about, lean on us anytime. The other thing is the number you want to be at if you want to have impact and you want to cast a shadow as a leader, and I mean that leading your life, you know, just influencing other people, that kicks in at 8. When we've done this research around the world, the average score for everyone is 6.3. And at 6.3, and I'll say 7, people are living their life, they're doing life, they're getting by in life, they might even be successful, but they're not thriving, they're not shining, they're not projecting an energy that influences other people. And I'm talking about in your family and in your relationship as well as at work. But when people are 9s and 10s, it's not about their brilliance and their expertise that might influence. It's just something about their energy, their vitality, their confidence, their courage, their enthusiasm. It just radiates, it permeates. And so when you think about leadership, leadership is influence. It's all about the energy we project. And we either project a positive, inspiring, encouraging, uplifting energy, or below 7, we start to project a more negative, resistant, negative sort of energy. And it's one where people say, you know, you're not fun to be around. You're not the person I married. It says something, is everything all right? You just don't look yourself. There's something that shifts. We are an energy force. And so your energy, it's not, you might think you've got it all under control and you're not, you know, you might be 5, but it's not really affecting my work. I'm still doing great work. Honestly, you may feel like that. But the other people around you, if they were honest, they'd say to you, yeah, I can see something's not right. I just didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to make it worse, you know? But sometimes it takes you to get to the other point where you're 6 months down the track and you look back and you go, geez, I'm in such a better place now. I've had people say that to me when things happen in my life and change, and they go, wow, you just seem so much happier. And I'm like, oh, I thought I was happy before. but like, yeah, you were happy, but you're so much happier. You know, it really comes through you. And I'm like, oh, okay, but I didn't see that in myself. And so equally, you may not see that it's going the other way either. So I would encourage you, if you want to be the best version of yourself and you want to project the best energy to others and you want to develop the best followership from your leadership, which is my metric for leadership, is how's the followership doing? You need to be an 8, 9, or 10 and challenge yourself to get there every day. It's possible. And when you talk to leaders that live lives where they are thriving and you say, how often do you think about thriving and getting yourself in shape to thrive? Honestly, they will tell you, I've interviewed them. They'll say, you know what, it's something I think about every day. I think about it in terms of how I get ready for work. I think about it with my fitness. I think about it with what I wear. It's on my mind all the time, how I approach my meetings, you know, how I think about the email I'm sending, the conversation I'm having with this person. I think about how do I show up as the best version of myself? How do I get in stride for that? And then equally, who are they and how do I project onto them? I was just working out a little while ago and I was watching a video of like a annual conference of a client of ours, and they had a performer there who was talking about storytelling. And he said, you got to think about who you are in the story and you got to think about your audience. And the best storytellers are always audience focused, not content focused. And so when you're going through life, you've got to think about, are you in stride? But then you also want to think about who am I communicating with and what is their ID and are they in stride? So of course, it's much easier when you know their ID, and especially now with our platform, you can look up people's IDs and, you know, especially if you've got work colleagues or family members and who've done the ID, it's very easy to not only see their ID, but there's a whole lot of collateral that you can tap into to know how you need to work those conversations and interactions to allow both of you to be in stride. But that really is the golden rule. First of all, to have your greatest impact and show it with your best credibility, it's to get in stride, and the number is 8, 9, or 10. I'm going to stop there in case anyone has questions or comments they would like to ask. And just keep in mind that you're maybe on mute. And if you can put your video on when you ask, that would be wonderful. And thanks, Andrew, for doing that. It's nice to see you here. Does anyone have anything they would like to share?
I think the biggest thing for me, Paul, is having some examples of what the early warning signals, and I feel they're quite personal, but there are also some that come up frequently that affect different IDs in different ways. You know, one of mine, which I keep myself being aware of, is that it's a vulnerability of mine to be overly critical. And so one of the things I keep myself in check with when I'm very busy, I love being busy and love working on lots of different things all at the same time, is that I'm aware of that vulnerability when running so quickly. You know, it's one of those early warning signals that I get hypercritical of the people I'm working with. So I just thought I'd offer that just as something that helps me be able to figure out if I'm in stride and not being detrimental to the other people I'm working with as well, when I'm, you know, a bit of a whirlwind sometimes with my ID.
Well, and that's a great call out, Tristan. And you can feel it in yourself, can't you? You can sort of go, well, what would my number be today? And you go, I feel like I'm a 6 or a 7. And what's showing up because of that, and you probably can pick it up straight away. I mean, the more self-aware you get, self-awareness is not just about knowing your strengths and weaknesses or what motivates you. It's knowing things like your early warning signals and what strategies quickly get you back in stride. I mean, the best leaders know this stuff. And so what we've done with ID is build the collateral, not as generic material, but for your particular wiring, for your makeup. How do you do that? And we've got videos on it that are on our YouTube channel, which is the Instinctive Drives YouTube channel. We've got collateral on our website. We've got collateral on our ID portal where you did your ID. You can tune back in there, to log back in, and there's all sorts of collateral that's about your ID. And then you can look up other people's IDs and you can check all that out. So, you know, I would really encourage you to get familiar with all of that resource that's available to you. It will make a huge difference in your life. And you wouldn't be the first person to say to us, wow, like the other day, someone said to me, it's the first time in a long time I feel seen. I've had other people say, you've saved my marriage, or I've been putting up with this health issue for years and it's finally now disappeared, or with work, I've been struggling and I'm finally enjoying my work, or I recently got promoted and it's been something I've been striving for the last X years, but I haven't had that breakthrough, and I finally got that breakthrough. So there's very tangible evidence of the difference it makes to live your life in stride, beyond just the impact you might have, in terms of your influence and impact, but what can come back to you because people are loving the best version of yourself. All right, I'm just going to go back up one slide to just show you now that we've talked about what in stride means. So here's what happens when you're in stride. You are more courageous and bold. It does mean that you come across way more authentically, and authenticity is the key to credibility. But the other thing that happens, and this is huge, when you are in stride, you're less preoccupied about your stuff. You're not worried about or fearful of what's going to happen to you, how someone else might react, or, feeling insecure. You feel confident, you feel courageous. So you're more available to put your attention out. There's an adage that one of our black belts in ID talks about: appreciation on, attention out, agenda off. I love that model. And you can't put the attention out while ever you're out of stride, because what naturally follows from that is that you're thinking about, how do I get back in stride? So your attention is on you. You're worried about what people are going to think about you. So it's attention in when you're out of stride. But if you get in stride, you automatically are liberated to be able to focus your attention outwards. And that way it's about impact, and you do it authentically, which means you enable your credibility. And that's really huge. Now, that's only a part of the equation. We're going to talk about the other side of that in a minute, which is what happens if you're being authentic and credible, but you're doing it in a way that doesn't work for somebody else, because they've got a different ID to you. That may not work. So we'll cover that in a second. The other two things you want to do is be future focused. If you want to think about how do you impact and the credibility, what really boosts that is when you get away from just doing stuff to when you connect it to some North Star or some future-focused vision. People love knowing the why. And the best leaders, whether it's in your family or whether it's in your workplace or in your friendship circles, when you connect the why to the task, whether it's a values-based why, whether it's a vision-based why, or a culture-based why, but when people have got deeper meaning, it enriches the whole reason they're doing what they're doing. And that creates greater influence and impact from your contribution. The other thing is self-awareness, because for all of your good intent, if you're not noticing how you're showing up and how certain words, certain reactions are going to impact other people, you're inadvertently eroding the very good intentions that you might otherwise be having. And for all your great efforts, and I'm going to give you examples of that when we dig into the next couple of slides, you could be undoing all of your good work. So before I move on, are there any questions or comments that people have? All right, feel free to put your hand up or put a note in the chat if it's something you'd like to explore.
Hi, Paul. It's Sandra here. Sorry,
Yes,
I took some time to get the unmute. There's something that's been on my mind for a while is, and I'm going back to basics on the ID, is, you were saying that it's hardwired from birth and so on and so forth. How much can traumas through the course of life shift the actual ID we have? If we've got so far out of, our stride, how much can it impact our original ID?
So your ID is your ID. Your ID won't change. So if you are 7445, I promise you, you can redo the ID in 5 years, 10 years. You're welcome to do it anytime. It will come up saying that you're 7445. You're a strong verifier. you've always had an instinct to want to process and think things through and compare and weigh them up. You always have, you always will. That's who you are. Whether you show up that way, whether you have the same sense of prioritization, that can change very much by life experiences, whether they be traumas or whether they just be like mentoring and coaching and development. So I'll give you an example. It's not so much a friend, but someone that I knew in one of my very first, when I started this business, I had three major clients, one of whom was a large accounting firm in Sydney, Australia. And this guy was the only survivor of a plane crash. And ironically, Sandra, he happened to have your ID. And so people who have got a strong verified drive do things that according to priorities. And his priority was all about moving up the career path, you know, getting promoted to one day be a partner of this accounting firm. But he also loved surfing. He was a really keen surfer, but he wasn't surfing as much because he, you know, he was trying to make his career. And when he survived this plane crash, he negotiated to have 3 months off every year to go surfing. I think he spent a lot of time up in Indonesia surfing. His name was Scott. I still remember him. And he, you know, was a much more laid back guy than what he was. I didn't know him before the plane accident, but he and others who I knew around him were saying, oh, he's a really different person. And has his ID changed? And Scott himself said, oh no, I'm still a big verifier. I still need to think everything through. But what did change for me was how I prioritize things. I'm still driven by priorities, but what I consider to be priorities in my life has definitely shifted. And surfing trumped the career path. You know, he didn't know how long he would have, and he wanted to make sure that he really lived life. So I don't know if he's still got surfing as his priority, but I just give that to you as an example of how that can shift. So the fundamentals are the same, but the definitions of things like what do you consider to be a priority if you're a verifier? What do you consider to be, as an improviser, what do you consider to be fun and challenging might change over time.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
You're welcome. Anybody else? All right, so what I'm going to show you and move along just in the interest of time, we put a lot of our collateral together in the form of these slides, and these slides map to an ID. So just like if I, well, let me show you. I'll show you all of this. So these are key things that can boost your impact and credibility. And the way that you read this slide, I'll use you, Sandra, as an example, given that you were kind enough to ask your question. You're a strong verifier. So you would look at this section over here in the top left-hand corner. You're not really strongly driven by any of the other drives. So I would say just focus mostly on this one. So I'll explain them in a second. If you were a strong improviser, you would look at, like I'm looking at you, Andrew, you're an 8. Actually, you've got 3 strong drives. You've got your 8 in improvise, means you'd pay attention to this top right-hand corner, but you're equally strong in the avoid complete drive. So you'd look at these things down here in avoid complete that you would also see could impact your credibility. And then you're a strong authenticator, you look at these things up here. Now, your strongest drives are the 2, the improvise and the avoid complete. They're a little bit stronger than the authenticate drive. So you pay most attention to these 2, but I'd take into account these ones as well. That's how we use these charts. So let me give you an example of what I mean. Without you trying to do these things, if you just show up, I'll use both you, Sandra, and Andrew. I'll refer to both of you. If I just pick one example. So as a strong verifier, when you show up with, you know, in stride, right, you naturally bring a perspective. And you might say, but doesn't everyone have a perspective? Yes, but there's something about the way you do it, because it's natural to you as a verifier. When you provide that balance of saying, I know you're seeing this, but there's also this perspective over here, and you provide that counter view, or you put things back into some level of balance, that's something that's very natural and very valuable, and it has impact. It's the sort of thing that's not just interesting, it's not just your opinion, it actually can have impact. The same with things like your perseverance. When you are sort of dog determined at staying with something, Sandra, people look at you, and you don't think anyone could even be watching, but they go, you know what? It really impacted me watching how you were so resilient, persevering with that particular issue, I know many other people would have given up, but it really inspired me by the way you persevered with that. Whatever it was, a relationship, a challenge at work, whatever it might be, it comes naturally to you. And you may not even think you were like intentionally doing it, because it just comes naturally. And the thing I love about these attributes is they're more about who are you being than what are you doing. But when you're in stride, the beingness of you shows up, the human being, not the human doing. The doing means there's so much more cognition in it. There's so much more thought and effort and application. But when you show up in your stride, and now I'll switch to you, Andrew, that's when people go, you know what, you just brought a sense of relief, a sense of like comedy or lightheartedness or fun. It just lifted the spirits. You know, we were sort of bogged down in stuff, and you just I don't know. And it's not because you're a funny person necessarily, or the entertainer, but there's something about the way you reacted to it or what you contributed that just lifted the energy. And you may not even realize, like, because it's not your intention, it's just what oozes out of you. It's really, and it could be the tone of your voice. It could be certain words you use. You know, it could be the smile or the timing of when you interject it. It doesn't matter, but it brings a lift in energy. So these things over here in the top right-hand corner are true for all improvisers if you're in stride. You might look at some improvisers, and this goes back to your point, Sandra, and go, you know, but that person's an improviser, but I do not see them bringing, you know, positive energy to this team or to this meeting. And I'm like, well, the first question to ask is, go back up here to this chart and think, are they on that green arrow? Are they in stride? Because you only radiate all of those features about your ID if you're in stride. They don't come through if you're not. It's like the volume's not turned up on who, you know, Andrew Clark is or who Sandra is, right? If you're not in stride. So these are really powerful. So if I use just a simple example of, I've used verify and improvise. Let's talk about, say, the authenticate drive. For those of you who've got that strong authenticate drive, like I'm looking at, who's an example I can see here with your ID. So Richie, you're an 8 in authenticate. Scott, I can see you're a 7. Philippa, you're a 7. I mean, they're strong drives, right? And so when you are in a relationship, whether it's one other person, whether it's a team at work, whether it's your family, but the very fact that you put things out on the table, you just like, well, there it is, whether it's sharing your feelings, whether it's sharing something that's going on, but you get it out on the table, people will say, you know, it really impacts the environment, that dynamic, because you're really transparent. People don't have to second guess you. They know where they stand with you. They'll often say that, you know, sometimes they may not even like what you say, but that doesn't mean they didn't appreciate that you said it. Like, you might give me feedback that I go, wow, I didn't really like that you said that, but you know what, now that I've thought about it, I'm really glad that you said it, because it's like, I can see that it's true. So just because you're transparent and that it impacts doesn't mean that it's nice or that it's always nice. I've got a friend of mine, he's actually got your ID, Andrew. He was my accountant for a period of time, and he has said some things to me that were really highly impactful, but they weren't nice to hear. And I learned a ton from what he had to share, and I feel forever grateful that he had the courage to speak, you know, to say those things to me. But he probably didn't even realize he was saying them. He was just like being his natural self. And Paul, I've got to tell you this, you know, and it was hugely valuable to me. So the transparency, the congruency of doing what you say, like if you say something, you mean it literally. That's the power of that authenticate drive. That's hugely impactful. And then for the completers, you know, the natural sense of like I call it paying attention to the little things, like the inclusion that people feel because you remembered their birthday. You remembered that a month ago they were going through this challenge. You remember that, you know, you actually, they gave you that particular gift, so you decided to wear that shirt when you went out to dinner with them because you remember that they gave that to you, that, you know, you'd given it to them or they gave it to you. I mean, that's those little things, they're actually big things to a lot of people. And when you do them, because it's you in stride, people notice and it really radiates. And you might think, oh, yeah, but wouldn't everyone do that? Not if they're not a completer. So I think I would say to you, don't just tick these boxes and go, oh, yeah, I do that. Oh, yeah, no, that. Yeah, I do that. I do it. You know, there was research work done probably about 15 years ago now by Marcus Buckingham that some of you might know when he was part of the Gallup organization. And it was all about strengths, people using their strengths. And although a lot of people know what their strengths are, the question was, how often do you use your strengths? And the answer was 8 to 10% of the time. So it's one thing to know them. It's another thing to use them. And people typically get distracted doing all sorts of other stuff, filling their days in doing things that are maybe needed, but it's not them in stride. And I guess that's why the average score is 6.3. The people that spend most of their time playing to their strengths are living their lives at 9s and 10s, but that's not the majority of people. So I would really commend you to dig into these, understanding these and thinking to yourself, okay, am I aware that this plays out for me? And is it something I try and amplify in order to have the greatest impact in my life? Any questions or comments?
Yes.
Hey,
Hi, Paul. It's Lynn. So my question is, I understand being in stride is where your strengths come out. So if you're not in stride, how do you get into stride again?
Great question. So we have a slide exactly like this, and it's called needs, the needs of each drive. And it actually shows you what you need to do to get into stride. I'm going to stop sharing, and while I'm talking it through with you, I'm going to see if I can call it up just so you can see it, and then I can even get it into the deck for you. So where's my webinar deck? Slides. I hope it's this one. And this will, no, it's not in this deck. I'm sorry, I thought it was. I'll get it for you. So we've got
Paul, why don't you keep talking and I'll bring it up, mate?
Okay, cool. So we actually have collateral, Lynn, that you can look at it and says, if these are the things that work for you as your strengths, what are the things that trip you up? And then what do you do to get back in stride? And it's very specific. So I'll use you as an example, Lynn, because it's you asked the question. As a strong verifier, if you were feeling like all out of sorts, because you're someone that likes everything to be organized and all your ducks in a row, the minute you make a list, you think about it. The minute you make a list and prioritize the list, how does that feel for you? Can you feel the difference? Right? Now, that does not work for everyone, but for someone who's a strong verifier, the minute they do that, they get back in stride, or they're on their way to getting back in stride. Now, there might be other things that are tripping you up as well. So, for example, if you felt really out of stride because you feel that, so fairness is a big need of a verifier, and you feel that you're not being remunerated in a way that is fair for you. Okay, well then what do you need to do to have the conversation about fairness? And so we can get quite specific, and you might then need to go and have that conversation, or find another currency that maybe helps, tilt the scales and makes it feel fairer, shift the perspective, that will talk to someone to get a different perspective. But there's very specific things you can do based on your strongest drives to then get back in stride. And we have the collateral for you you just walk through and go, yeah, I've done that. Yep, I've done that. Like, I've made my list. I've prioritized my list. But yep, here's the thing I need to do. I need feedback. I haven't got feedback. So here you go. Tristan's putting up some, key needs of each drive. And then we've got strategies for how do you do each of these things. So it's very specific and very instructional for how you actually get these needs fulfilled in your life. All right, let me come back to my slide. So I'll share my screen again.
While Paul's doing that, you can also log into the play. Oh, sorry, Saruchi. Yeah.
Sorry,
go ahead. There you go.
So my question for Paul was, have you observed any major influence of culture on these strides? Like, I've worked in APJC teams, I've worked with the American teams, and I do tend to see there's a bit of a trend in the way that people show up. And is there any correlation if you might see more authenticators or improvisers or verifiers from certain part of the world?
What a great question. So we've worked with lots of cultures. I've actually studied, I forget now whether it was like about 170 different cultures of work done by a group called the Hofstadter Institute. I don't know if anyone's ever done any work with them. It's fascinating work on all the different cultures around the world, including, you know, breaking down all of the different cultures, for example, in Asia, all the different countries and the differences in cultures. And it's fascinating. We've done the ID in many countries, including, for example, it's years ago now, but I remember working across 14 countries in Asia. We have not found any change in diversity of IDs in any of the cultures. So we find improvisers in Japan, even though it's a very structured, organized culture, we've still found, you know, improvisers there as we find in the US, where people think it's an entrepreneurial world, you know. What does vary is the degree to which people are in stride with their IDs because of the culture they're in. So if you feel, for example, if you feel that it's safe to speak your truth, then you're more inclined to do that. And as an authenticator, you of course want to do that. You need to do that. You need to be, you know, able to be transparent and congruent. But if you're in a culture or an environment, so whether that culture is a country culture or whether the culture is a work culture or a family culture where it's not safe or sensible to speak your truth, then although you might be an authenticator that needs to do that, then it doesn't mean you will. And therefore that energy starts to then sort of like turn on itself and come back in, and it fuels a level of stress and frustration that will really be very depleting. So cultures aren't just country cultures, they can be in other sort of subcultures. But yeah, we haven't found any difference in ID. I've worked in school cultures. Where I find it to be different is in certain like work and what's the word, like passion, interest, you know, pursuit. So I've worked a lot with elite athletes. I can tell you that vast majority of elite athletes avoid improvise, like in the 90% are avoid improvise. It's very rare to find an elite athlete who is a strong improviser. So that doesn't mean you can't do it. I'm just saying it's really rare. It would be really rare to find a strong improviser neurosurgeon. I remember with the Melbourne Ambulance Service, there were over 300 paramedics we did the IDs on. There was one improviser, and he was their media relations person. There are certain career paths that push, you know, they basically, if you're not wired a certain way, they push you out. So there are cultures that way where we see it play out, to your question, Suruchi, but not at a country level. We find the full diversity across all of the country cultures that we've been exposed to so far.
Okay, thanks. That's quite fascinating. Thanks, Paul.
It is, isn't it? So the key is not whether we find them, it's whether people have the freedom and the empowerment to show up and be their authentic selves.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. So what I want to do, given the time pressure, I want to quickly show you this next slide. I have to share my screen here and show you this. These are the things that can erode it. So when you think about what happens when you are out of stride, there are things that start to happen quite naturally from your ID that actually can cause you to be out of cause you to erode your impact and credibility. So I'll just share a couple of these with you. If you are an avoid verifier and you start to get bogged down in all the detail, you just shut down. And people can sense that you're disengaged and, you know, or you're just not present. And it starts to impact the way, well, it impacts, right? So it impacts them, it impacts your credibility, it impacts maybe direction or results, but it starts to impact. And so looking at that as one of your attributes and going, okay, how do I manage that better so that my shutting down doesn't impact, or that maybe I don't shut down. Like maybe I task myself with something to do, or I call it out. Or maybe I just don't even go to the meeting and I tell people that. I'm just upfront that, you know, that meeting is not going to work for me, or I come for the first 5 minutes to hear or the last 5 minutes to hear the summary, but I don't need to be there for all of the workings of the detail, because honestly, I'll just shut down, and that's not good for the group. And people with the ID gives you a framework, and people call it a common language, to be able to express yourself like that so that people understand it. If you are an avoid improviser, one of the things of an avoid improviser that's a strength is that the more it's a struggle, the tougher things are, the better you perform. But if when you're doing that work, because it is tough and it is a struggle, if you're voicing the struggle with your huffing, your puffing, your swearing, your whatever it is that's sort of indicating it really is hard, whilst that might be motivating to you because it fuels you up to fight and the struggle drives you through, that's not necessarily how the other people around you see it. They see you huffing and puffing, so they might want to help, or they might get turned off and they want to leave. So although it's natural to you, it's something that, and it will be worse if you are out of stride, it can erode your impact and your credibility. And I think it's just cool to know that this is how these things show up. I talked before about the improviser being lighthearted or bringing levity to a situation, but there are people in the room that might see you as being flippant, and flippant destroys your credibility, or it really has a negative impact on the dynamic. People feel like, oh, you just made fun of me, or you made fun of something I was sharing. I was actually being quite sincere, and I share that, and you just, okay, well, shut up now, you know? So it had a really negative impact. So what we need to be careful of is, although it's natural to us to be lighthearted, what about the people in the room? Have they got a similar ID, and are they up for the lightheartedness? And not just because they're an avoid improvise. It could be an improvised person who's being sincere in that moment, and the lightheartedness was inappropriate even for them. So it's important to know yourself and know what you need to be in stride, but equally knowing where other people are at, and the parts of you that are like the shadow side of what might sometimes show up quite naturally but not land the right way for other people, and therefore it has the wrong impact and it actually erodes your credibility. This is really powerful. Now, I saw someone in the chat before mention about the standout profiles. That is really a tool that Cisco uses as part of their human resource management framework. It's an excellent tool. It really defines people's strengths that stand out in a work environment. And I find it to be very accurate for, you know, what does stand out about people. But here's what's really cool, and this is why in Cisco's case they use the standout profile and the ID profile together now, is because what they've found is when people are in stride and true to themselves, their strengths stand out. But if you've got your standout strengths, but you're out of stride, then you hide, you shrink, and those strengths don't stand out so much. And so the key is, if you want your strengths to stand out, get in stride. And that's why the two then now work really nicely together. Does anyone have any questions as we get close to the...
I've got a quick question. Now, I know my standout profile and I know my ID. What I'm probably not sure of how they go well together, because maybe no one has actually sat us down and helped us understand that they are correlated, because they both are part of us.
So
do you
the
also...
correlation... Oh, sorry, go, Suruchi.
Yeah, I was just like, if you have something quick for us to understand the correlation and how each one of them plays out.
Okay, so the correlation is not that certain standout strengths correlate to ID. It's not that if you are a pioneer or a creator or a stimulator, that will correlate with being an improviser or an authenticator. Or it doesn't work that way. The correlation is this simple. If you, as a strong authenticator, you need a clear picture, you need to feel that you are useful. So if, let's just say, you are a stimulator, then you will be most stimulating when you have a clear picture and you feel that by making a useful contribution, this is going to matter, it's relevant, like that plays to your authenticate drive, then you're going to be stimulating. But if you don't have a clear picture, you don't understand what people are doing, and you feel like it's a waste of your time, you won't be very stimulating. So the strengths won't stand out then, right? And that's the really cool way to use the two tools together.
Yeah, that helps. Thanks, Paul.
Makes sense? Yeah. So guys, we've come to the top of the hour. The slides that I've used today and that Tristan showed as well, we'll include in the deck and send out with the recording. In 2 weeks' time, we have the ID Masterclass when we'll dig into these more, and that gives you a chance to come back, ask any questions that you might feel are really relevant to your own, life right now, and showing up the best version of yourself. You'll hear other people share their stories and their situations, and you get the chance then, if you've got a similar ID or even a different ID, to share. You'll find that session way more interactive, and it's a lot of fun to have that level of conversation occurring so openly and honestly. So thank you for participating and being here today. I look forward to hopefully seeing you in 2 weeks' time. Until then, stay in stride, be true to yourself, and know that when you do that, that's when you're making your greatest contribution and impact on other people. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.